We're in the 19th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. One of the things I have discovered is that if you're translating, it's never over. You can always find, put a comma here, or an apostrophe there, or say it a little differently. But this, once it's in print, that's it. Mike said we were in verse 14 of Luke 19, the parable of the $10,000 investment. One of the things I like to do is to ask people, not to be blurted out in class or anything, how much is your net worth? Now, most people in the middle class underestimate their net worth. I remember the first time we had to submit a report. I guess it was when we bought our house. And I was surprised. I was surprised at the amount of investment we had. And what I want you to think about is how much of that net worth are you investing in what Jesus calls the heavenly things? The preacher one time said, "You show me your check stubs, and I can make a good estimate about the depth of your faith." Because what does Jesus say? Where your treasure is. No, he says it backward. where your heart is, your treasure is. And that's true. You put money, I put money where I'm interested in what I'm interested in. Now, I know there's necessities and all that, but your checkbook, receipt, will picture where you have your heart. And that's what this is all about. Now, this parable is a difficult one to decide what version of it Jesus spoke. Sometimes he gave varying amounts. That's where we get our word talent from. Sometimes it's an equal amount. Sometimes it's a rich man. Sometimes it's a man going off to be a king. That was pretty often back then, because nobody was a king of any territory within the Roman Empire without the express approval of the emperor. Nobody, it just wasn't done. And so somebody 2 weeks ago said they had never noticed that this was to go off and get to your kingship. But this makes this fit the historical situation even better. Now, why do I say that? The idea of going off and getting your kingship and then coming back and exercising it. Why did I say that makes this parable more applicable to the historical situation? What is going on right now in the life of Jesus?
He's about to probably maybe enter into Jerusalem.
You want to speak a little louder?
Oh, is he about to? He's about to enter into Jerusalem. It's on the bottom of the page.
Yes.
I cheated just like you did last week.
Jesus is approaching the event that's going to make him king. He was demonstrated to be the king by his death, burial, and resurrection. He became king. You remember the writer of Hebrews said, though he were a son, he learned obedience through the things he suffered, and being made perfect. I remember the first time I taught the book of Hebrews, how hard a time I had explaining to some people how Jesus could be made more perfect. But what one thing hasn't Jesus experienced at this point in his life?
Death.
What?
Death.
Death. That's right. He has not suffered death. He has not met the last enemy. And we talked maybe more than was good last week. Suffering always comes before reward. Not very tasty idea, is it? But it's true. I always think, I worked for 3 years as a volunteer chaplain at the old Bexar County Hospital. And one of the things that I always noticed was that the happiest place in a hospital is associated with the birth of a child. I don't care how much pain and how much hollering and how much goes on, the mother soon forgets that. Now, I know that you can say, here, there's a man who never had a baby in his life, but and don't want one, but that's really not true, because women forget. They forget in the joy. And Jesus knew that. He said, in the joy that there's a new something in the world, uses a kind of general phrase, the mother rejoices. And you can just go down the aisle. You don't have to know the people. You don't have to be connected in any way. And it's still, people smile, they slap each other on the back. Which one is yours? If you really want to know, stand outside when the babies are put on display, and you are not strangers at all. Which one is yours? And sometimes they'd be disappointed when I said, none of them are mine. But that is what we're is going on. The climax of the life of Jesus, the death, burial, and resurrection is right ahead. And it is when he will be lifted up on the cross. If I be lifted up, then God will give me the reward. So let's start at where Mike, I'm going to assume he's right. Verse 14, chapter 19. Some of the citizens of his country hated him and sent a delegation to follow him. When he returned after having been appointed to rule over his country, he summons the money managers to whom he had been entrusted with to whom he had entrusted the $10,000. He wanted to find out how much profit they had made in doing business with his money. When the first manager came before the king, he reported, "Your $10,000 has earned $100,000 more." "Excellent," said the man. "You're a good financial manager. So since you have proven yourself in handling a small sum of money, you will manage the finances of 10 cities." The second manager came before the king and reported, "Your $10,000 investment has earned $50,000 more." Now, when I first started trying to teach parables to adults, the thing I had to get was Jesus does not use parables to teach moral or the correct way to live. He illustrates one point. He may have more than one point, but he illustrates it's limited. So this is not how you ought to treat people morally and ethically, because we'll see why. So you will manage the financial affairs of 5 cities. And another of the managers came before the king and reported, "Look, my lord, here is your $10,000. I wrapped it up in a cloth and hid it in a safe place because I am afraid of you." Now, is it good to be afraid of God? I want to get some.
Not in this, not hit the kind of fear he had.
I like that answer. You want to explain yourself a little more?
Well, he didn't understand the character of God. He really didn't. He had false ideas about God. And so his fear came out of those false ideas, ignorant ideas, really. So that's not a healthy fear. I guess if there are healthy fears like fire and all that kind of stuff.
Yes. Okay.
But we of course should fear God, because the Bible talks about fearing God, but that's a healthy, good thing to do.
Okay, that's good. Anyone else want to? Jesse.
Our fears many times are based on prejudices, preconceived ideas, preconceived expectations that we conjure up.
Yeah.
Not because it's truth,
Right.
not because it's real, just because it's already here. And that can be molded, it can be changed if we're willing to see more of the light, more of the truth. So we're always going to have irrational fears as long as we leave our minds closed to the possibility of what if we can't accept that God is all loving as well as all powerful, all graceful as well as all merciful, if we can't conceive of those things, we're going to have the wrong idea of who God is. And therefore, our response to him and the way we see that, we think that he's going to respond to us, is going to be warped by those preconceived ideas.
There is, some people think of fear as terror, and some as in awe. I think it's the awe part here. Another verse I'm reminded of is, and I can't remember where, but it's that which I was afraid of has come upon me, and that which I fear is coming to me, or something to that effect.
Who knows what character in the Bible said, "What I feared has come upon me"?
Ooh, that's a big trivia question. Wow.
I would say probably David.
What?
David, I would think.
David?
With
He could have.
Saul.
Charles,
Outside.
I've always looked at this parable differently than what I've heard this morning. I've seen it as a parable saying that you are to use your talents that are given to you. If you don't use them, you will lose favor in the sight of God.
Yeah.
And not so much a question of taking risks as a question of acknowledging that you have some gift that can be used and then using it.
Yep. And that's the reason I ask it. It's, in some places, some occasions in our lives, it's proper to fear God.
Proverbs 9:10 says that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Would you speak a little louder?
Proverbs 9:10 says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Yes, I'm always aware of those Old Testament passages. If you don't recognize God as God, you will not serve him as God. And that's great. That's where I part company with these people, preachers who are, come be a believer and God will make you wealthy. That's the wrong motivation.
Brother Charles, one more thing on this fear. Sometimes fear comes from a lack of faith in God. So that's the terror part of it, I think.
That's what Jesus says to his apostles one time when they were in the boat and there was a storm.
Right, exactly.
He said, it's lack of faith that makes you afraid of the winds and the waves.
I've always understood when the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, that fear is reverential fear versus terror. And it's the reverential fear that leads to wisdom.
Yes. See, if you... I have a very dear friend. Hadn't really kept up the friendship as much, but out of the blue, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, he called and asked if he could take me to lunch. And we talked about these ideas. And he didn't want it to be true that fear of the Lord was the beginning of wisdom. And as a result, his view of the nature of sin was not a good one. He wanted to make it only immorality, promiscuity, that kind of thing. And it took a while for me to get through to him that anything God says to do, if you don't do it, it's sin. Now that can make something sin for you. It's not sin for me. And also, there are things that are sin for me that wouldn't be sin for others. I'm not trying to eliminate anybody in this class. In fact, I'm not going to. We have people in this class that are good teachers. And they, like me, if they don't teach, it's sin. But for the majority of this class, you're not called upon to be a teacher. I'm sitting here resisting temptation.
Have the proper fear.
What?
Have the proper fear.
What I'm wondering is, I'm just going to put it this way. Is there anyone with enough courage to tell this class what they think God has put them on earth for and how well they have kept it?
Well, a good place to start, I believe, with that question is back when Randy turned us onto that spiritual gifts app, that little test, you know, and I thought that was really excellent. And I think my top one was faith, and then it was discernment, and then teaching, I think, and the one that I discovered that I didn't really think about too much is I have the gift of mercy. In other words, I deeply, deeply can have compassion and feel, I don't know, other people's suffering, which is a great thing, I guess, in some ways. In some ways it's not, because, you know, I almost get very too far deep into people's suffering. It really, I take it on, you know, but anyway. So that's a good place to start, because I do feel that, you know, God has gifted me, you know, particularly with the gift of faith, you know, and I think I am hopefully using that gift to serve Him and to serve others, you know.
I'm going to use the man sitting right in front of me here as an example. He is meticulous in recording these classes and the classes that he's recording to produce a body of teaching. And when I say meticulous, he is more meticulous about my work than I am about it. And it may be that that's a good thing, that I have always been ready to get something over with. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? And as a result, I don't do as good a work. Mike, it's a risk of turning you redder than you are. One of the things that I thank God for in our nightly prayer is you, because you actually cause me to produce more effective and more truthful material than I would without you. Do you see? Now, I'm going to take somebody that doesn't speak out very often. Right back here in the lavender top. What do you think God has called you to do?
I really don't talk a whole lot, so. To be, the works that I do, I'm fairly, it'd be safe to call it, do fiduciary works. I work a lot in healthcare, so.
Can somebody,
She works in healthcare.
okay, and how can you use that to serve God?
Basically by taking care of his people.
Again,
Taking care of his people.
Taking care of.
Yeah, she takes care of his people.
yes. Do you know that it is not that I teach that I will be rewarded for? It wasn't because I teach, no, that I was honored this past summer with 2 or 3 special occasions. It's because I teach God's people. That's, I can't begin to tell you how satisfying it is to see somebody that you have taught about Jesus, they have learned and have made his serving him part of their daily life. It's just, mine feels the same.
I don't want to interrupt you, but it said my son, when he was a senior in college at Harding University, was appointed or chosen or whatever to be the leader of a spiritual life committee.
Mm-hmm.
And when his time was up, he didn't do that for the next year or whatever. And he said, "Mom," says, "I just think I'm better as a Christian at large than a director or a leader or anything, And I think that a lot of us feel that way. You ask us what we're good at, and just a Christian at large. You just live the daily life as you were leading to.
Yeah.
What we do. God hasn't gifted us with being a surgeon or a speaker or a singer. We just live the daily life.
Yes.
I've just kind of been amazed at what I've seen God do in my life as I've gotten older. I've always considered myself a nurturer and an encourager of children. My own children, one was a handicapped child, and then I've been privileged to kind of half raise, I guess you could say, my grandchildren. And it's been just terrific. I never considered myself to be a teacher or to have any kind of leadership role with adults, but God saw that differently. And so even though I continue to teach children and to nurture children and love children, several years back, I had some of our Christian ladies kind of chase me down the hall one day and say, "You can do this, you can do this, we need you to do this." What they were needing was another table leader for a ladies' Bible class. And I knew that they had been needing that, but I'm just like, no, I can't do that. Well, they just said, "You can do it and we really need you." So I said, well, I guess God's calling me to do that, so I'll do it. Well, I've been doing that now for, 5, 6, 7 years, and I love it. It's just been amazing to me how God has allowed me to grow in ways that I never, expected to. From that point of being the leader of this group of 9 ladies,
from that point, I was asked to lead prayers in the class in front of the whole group. Well, that was also something that I could never get in front of a group and do anything like that. But God really said, yes, you can. And so I pray now in front of large groups of women. Then later, we have prayer ministers at church that pray with people during church and after church. And a lady said, we desperately need more prayer ministers, especially after church services in the Bluebonnet room. She said, you can do this, you've got to do this. And I said, well, I'm just going to have to wait for the class, because that class that teaches you how to do that, I can't do that kind of thing. Well, so I did. I hung in and I waited for that class. Well, the class didn't really teach me anything, but God said, you already know how to pray. Well, so now I pray with people in front, I pray with people after church services. God has blessed me greatly and allowed me to grow so much in Him and to help other people, but I am the most blessed of all, because I've had people approach me and give me that little shove I needed to say, you can do more. God has blessed you in more ways than you know, and it has just been wonderful. And I feel honored to share that with you all, because we can all continue to grow. It doesn't matter what we think our gifts are. God can use us in any way He wants to, ways that we never thought we could be used. And it is a blessing and a privilege to serve Him in these ways.
I saw the previews, or whatever you call them, about the Flight 893 on 9/11, the people that took arms and said, no, you're not taking this plane and dropping it on the White House on 9/11. Could have been a lot worse than it was. And they were ordinary people. And I'm feeling really good right now, folks, because if I had scripted your answers, I couldn't have done as good a job. So keep up the good work. And I just figured out while y'all were talking why I had that feeling 2 weeks ago, and it's niggling feeling coming back of the bottom dropping out of things. Just let everybody be completely still and quiet for just a second. What did you hear?
The air conditioner.
What?
The air conditioner.
Yes, who said that? Yes, you didn't hear anything. They have come back in and double insulated or something. They have silenced these classrooms.
You can't hear the children.
You can't hear the kids next door.
Yeah, you can't hear anything but what's going on in the classroom. I'm glad to get that cleared. I thought maybe I was losing it, which I may be. But yes, I couldn't have done a better job. And you say, well, we got off of the text. No, we didn't, because the text is about using the gifts that God has given you to bring glory to His name. That's it. That's what this is all about.
Charles, it is a matter of discovering the different investments He has made and is going to make in just where He places you. This is what I found at work. I've been in many different jobs over the past 10 years where I thought I was going to be in one job for a long time. And I wondered why these changes when I didn't look for them, and yet God had different reasons for taking me to these different places. It's a different mission, in a sense. And my discovering that has made my anxiety over I'm not making enough money or things like that. It has put that in the background compared to what God is trying to use me as an example, or as, when my dad died here in June, people were very surprised that I was even there at work when he had just died the day before. That just little example of a steadiness that God has given me in my workplace has been an example to others, which I could not have orchestrated either. But that's seeing how God is investing and the fruit of that investment.
See, God paid the price for each one of us, each believer. In 1 Corinthians, where that he paid the price, and we no longer belong to ourselves. And Paul makes a big play out of that in the book of 1 Corinthians, where we need to recognize that we're gifted by God, and we don't have anything that God hasn't given us.
That's right.
Not a thing. And that's the reason that it's foolish to judge you against me or me against you in anything. Because Paul says it's all from God. And if it's a gift, then why do you act like it wasn't a gift? My old story about Mark Twain. He was invited to a big dinner party back when he was at his prime. And
Charles, does the passage in Proverbs, which is trust in God with all your might, lean not on your own understanding, seek His will in all that you do, and He will direct your steps. Is that not applicable here?
it is very applicable. See, it's that gift from God. And how are you going to use it? And that makes everything a Christian virtue. If it is done, if it's honest and open and serving others. I do want to get maybe through with this parable before this lesson is over, but let's go on.
You're going to finish the Mark Twain thought?
Oh, sorry. He was sitting beside this big multi-millionaire, and the fellow said, struck up an acquaintance with Mr. Twain, and the fellow was saying, said, all these young people today, they think God owes them something, but I don't. Said, I am exactly what I made myself. I am a self-made man. And Mark Twain said, thank God. He says, what do you mean, thank God? He said, I was sitting here thinking, I was having an awful difficulty thinking that you are a product of God.
Oh, that's terrible.
Well, I've seen a few people that
Oh, I know.
God might
Yeah.
Just,
None of us have the courage to say that.
it's like the one,
Mark Twain.
the Jewish rabbinic story. And there's a little old man back in the 18th century, in that territory between Poland and Russia, and nobody could stand him. He was just almost impossible to get along with. And finally, the local rabbi in his prayers just got enough and said, "Oh, honored one, oh," I can't remember how he addressed him. Of course, they do not address God directly, but the idea was that how long are you going to make us put up with this fella? And God got all he could say. And the voice came back and he says, "You put up with him for 1 hour at worship on the Sabbath. I have to put up with him 24/7. He said, "Don't complain to me." And like the woman who was contemplating a divorce, I was counseling her, and I gave her all the reasons why she shouldn't and all, because I thought they were there. And later on she said, "You asked some questions that made me begin to think." He said, I only put up with him as a husband." He said, "He's your child. And maybe I ought to learn to put up with him more." Let's go on and see if we can. I'm going to skip on down, verse 20. Another of the managers came before the king and reported, "Look, my lord, here is your $10,000 wrapped up in cloth and hid in a safe place, because I'm afraid of you. You are a tough man." Now, that's not usually found, but in the text of the Bible, but it catches the the word in Greek. It's not that he was a mean man. It's not that he was cruel or anything like that. He said he was tough. When I played high school football the last year, we had a coach that was tough. And I'm a better man because he was tough. I've always been, a little physically lazy. And he wouldn't let you be physically lazy. If you weren't moving, you better be. He wanted you to move all the time and serve him.
Charles, I have a question here that's always, I wouldn't say bothered me, but it's come to my mind every time I go through this parable. The point that this particular Lord didn't invest anything.
Yes.
And I felt that if Jesus is trying to tell us that God expects us to use the gifts that we give, and then somewhere along the way there's some comment which to me seems almost irrelevant. He says he doesn't invest anything. I'm not quite sure why that's there. Do you know why?
No, but I think you know, basic teaching on parables needs to be emphasized. A parable, the comparison in a parable is good only as far as the person using the parable wants it to go. I use an example, poetic example of Robert Burns' poem. And he has this beautiful poem that starts off, "My love is like a red, red rose." And I used to quote that in class. And then I'd ask the class, was his beloved like a red, red rose? How would you answer that question?
Well, in some ways, she must have been.
What?
She must have been in some ways.
Okay, that's the, in some ways, that's the thing.
I didn't hear.
She said, yes, she must have been in some ways, but it didn't necessarily mean she had thorns. And that's the thing. You can't take every little detail in a parable and make it mean something.
But there are people out there, when you're talking to them, who do take those.
Oh, yes, and here's the thing. Did you see the young man that came in and then there was reason for that? He just wanted to stake his seat. He works in the data processing part of the church, but he wants to start this class. And he started out, he had a question that was just almost your question. Why this omission? Well, because Jesus wanted it omitted, is the point I'm trying to make.
Well, I've always answered that if you want to take this parable literally, bear in mind the fact that we're not to judge anybody. We aren't. It's he who does the judging. And whether or not he's made an investment is not relevant to my salvation.
No. Yes. And so this,
to that point that Hope's making, I think it's interesting, and we're like a sentence away, where he says, the king says, "I will convict you on the evidence of your own words."
yes.
So he takes what that excuse is that's given and shows how it reveals that man's heart, that there's something wrong here from
Yes.
what you even said.
Yes.
He's convicting on his words, not saying, yeah, you're right, because that's the way I am, but he's turning it around on him.
Yes. Yes. He said, you recognize I'm a tough man, and all you would have had to done is just put it in the bank. There's always, and that could get us to a whole class on excuses. It's amazing.
It's like the bare minimum is putting it in the bank.
What?
That's the bare minimum. And I think there are a lot of Christians that do the bare minimum, maybe whatever that means to them.
Okay.
When I have looked at this in the past, it seems to me, if you really think about what the preferred thing to do was to collect profit where you haven't invested or harvest a crop you haven't planted, you can, and apply this to your Christian walk, you can plan to do certain things with your talents, how you're gonna invest your talent, but you should not overlook opportunities that just spring up to do it, things you haven't planned, but you should always be looking for ways to apply it. As a minimum, if you don't do that, yeah, put it in the bank, I guess. But
I never thought about the minimum, but that's true. That God, in His grace and mercy, would be satisfied with the minimum, and that's putting it in the bank. Actually, He's on our side.
yeah.
Well, the other thing here in this parable is you've got one person with more gifts than the other one. But in the case of two of them, they did reinvest use the talent that they had, or the gift that they had, and they were blessed for doing that. Just because the guy was less money, fewer gifts, wasn't able to produce the same result as the guy with more money, doesn't mean that the guy with less money is going to be condemned. It's the guy who does nothing with his talent is the one who is condemned.
Yes.
I think there's another light to the story also that we're kind of not taking into account here. Recognizing your talents. You know, you ask the question, what is your talent? Well, I personally feel like I have many talents. And do I use them all? No, I don't. But on the other hand, I also feel like God puts me in situations where those talents that I might not even realize I have, that I have the opportunity to use. If I don't take those opportunities, then I'm not investing in those talents. So in that sense, I could, if I were the wealthy king, I could recuperate, make profits, to use this metaphor, on places where I personally hadn't invested my time or effort. But God put me there, and I used the opportunity that was presented at the time.
Well, I like that.
Well, I was just gonna add this humble little thought that the ones that did act on their talents, I think they stepped out in trust that what had been given to them, since the king, or the would-be king, had given it to them, and they trusted and felt confident that he gave this to me to use, so now I'm gonna step out on faith and invest it. And so I think there's an element of faith and trust in the individual bestowing the gifts in order for you to act upon them. So I think that the guy in the end just didn't have the faith or the trust to act on the gifts that were given to him.
Well, class got back up to speed. Okay, Alicia.